The coffee was still warm in her hand when everything changed. 7 minutes. That's all it took for Simone Washington to go from being called a security risk to walking into the executive boardroom and firing every single manager who had looked the other way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Meridian Square Shopping Center buzzed with its usual Wednesday morning energy. The gleaming floors reflected the soft glow of boutique windows, and the gentle hum of conversation mixed with the distant sound of a piano from the cafe near the main entrance. It was the kind of upscale mall that prided itself on atmosphere, where every detail was carefully curated to create an experience, not just a shopping trip. Simone Washington stepped through the automatic doors at exactly 9:47 a.m., her black leather portfolio tucked under one arm, a travel mug of coffee in her other hand. She wore a charcoal wool coat over dark jeans and simple ankle boots. Her hair was pulled back in a low ponytail, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged wherever she chose to be. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she was, a professional woman starting her day. But in this particular mall, on this particular morning, that simple truth would prove more complicated than anyone anticipated. The first floor of Meridian Square was divided into sections. The main corridor housed mid-tier retailers, stores that were nice enough to feel special but accessible enough to draw steady traffic. The second level held the premium brands, and tucked away on the third floor was something called the Executive Lounge, a members-only space that most shoppers never even knew existed. Simone had studied the mall's layout the night before, not because she was planning to shop, but because understanding a space was part of her process. She moved through the main corridor slowly, observing the flow of foot traffic, the positioning of security cameras, the way staff interacted with different customers. Near the center fountain, she paused to check her phone. A mother pushed a stroller past her, chatting on a wireless headset about school pickup times. Two teenagers shared earbuds by the pretzel stand, completely absorbed in whatever they were watching. An elderly man sat on a bench, reading a newspaper, and occasionally glancing up at People Watch. It was beautifully ordinary, the kind of place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Simone continued walking, her trained eye catching details that most people missed. The way the security guard near Victoria's Secret kept his attention focused on certain customers longer than others. How the jewelry store clerk stepped slightly forward when well-dressed shoppers approached but remained behind the counter for everyone else. The subtle positioning of mall staff that created invisible barriers between different types of people. She wasn't here by accident. Meridian Square had been flagged in a corporate review for unusual customer complaint patterns, particularly regarding what the reports diplomatically called inconsistent service experiences. The complaints themselves were vague, feelings of being unwelcome, unexpected security attention, problems with returns that seemed to resolve differently for different people. On paper, it looked like isolated incidents. In person, Simone was beginning to see the pattern. She made her way toward the escalator, planning to visit the second level where most of the complaints had originated. As she stepped onto the moving stairs, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to 10:30, conference room prepped, coffee waiting. Simone smiled slightly. In about 40 minutes, she would be sitting in that conference room with the regional management team of Meridian Square's parent company. They had no idea she was here. They thought their first meeting with the new Regional Vice President of Customer Experience would be a friendly introduction over pastries and quarterly reports. They were about to learn otherwise. The second floor opened up into a wider space with higher ceilings and more expensive lighting. This was where the real money got spent. Designer handbags, premium cosmetics, jewelry that required conversations rather than browsing. The atmosphere was noticeably different up here. Quieter, more exclusive, with staff who were trained to assess and prioritize customers from the moment they walked in. Simone approached the cosmetics counter of a high-end department store. The associate, a young woman with perfectly applied makeup and a practiced smile, looked up as she approached. "Good morning. Are you looking for anything specific today?" The greeting was professional but measured. Simone noticed the slight pause before the woman had spoken. The way her eyes had quickly assessed Simone's appearance, coat, jeans, lack of obvious designer accessories. The smile never wavered, but there was a distance in it. "I'm just browsing," Simone replied pleasantly. "Do you mind if I try this lipstick?" Of course. The associate reached for a disposable applicator, but her movements were just a fraction slower than they had been with the previous customer, an older white woman who had been invited to sit down and offered a hand mirror. Simone tested the color, asked a few questions about the formula, and thanked the associate for her time. The interaction was perfectly polite and completely cold. Nothing she could point to as discriminatory, but everything about it felt different from what she had observed moments before. This was exactly what she had come to see. As she moved through the floor, the pattern repeated itself. Not obvious prejudice, nothing that would show up in a training manual as wrong, but a consistent difference in energy, attention, and assumption. The kind of subtle bias that was almost impossible to prove because it lived in tone and body language rather than words or actions. Simone was documenting it all, not in a notebook, but in her memory. She had been doing this kind of observation for 15 years, and she had learned that the most important discrimination was often the kind that people didn't even realize they were perpetrating. Near the luxury handbags section, she overheard a conversation between two sales associates during what they thought was a private moment. "Did you see her touching the Chanel display?" one whispered to the other. "The woman in the coat? Yeah, I noticed. She's been wandering around for like 20 minutes. Think she's actually shopping or just looking? Hard to say. She doesn't really fit the profile of our usual Chanel customers." They weren't talking loudly, and they weren't being intentionally cruel, but their words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. She doesn't really fit the profile. There it was, the assumption that would unravel everything in about 20 minutes. Simone checked her watch, 10:15. She had seen enough of the second floor, time to head upstairs to the executive lounge, where the real test would happen. The third floor was where members of the mall's VIP program could relax, make private purchases, and enjoy what the marketing materials called a refined retail experience. It was also where the most serious complaints had originated. As she approached the escalator to the third floor, Simone felt the familiar calm that always settled over her before important moments. She had spent years learning to control her reactions, to stay composed no matter what happened around her. It was a skill that had served her well in boardrooms and courtrooms, and it was about to be tested in a shopping mall in ways that would surprise everyone involved. The third floor was quieter, more carpeted, with softer lighting and fewer people. The executive lounge entrance was marked by frosted glass doors and a small sign that simply read, "Members Only." Through the glass, she could see comfortable seating areas, a small cafe, and several private shopping suites. Simone approached the doors and was immediately met by a hostess in a navy blazer. "Good morning. Are you here for the executive lounge?" "Yes," Simone replied simply. "Wonderful. May I see your membership card?" This was the moment Simone had been waiting for. She reached into her portfolio, not for a membership card, but for something else entirely. Something that would change the trajectory of everyone's morning in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But first, she wanted to see exactly how this situation would unfold when they discovered she didn't have what they expected her to have. "I don't have a membership card," Simone said calmly. The hostess, whose name tag read Jessica, maintained her professional smile, but something shifted in her posture. "Oh, I see. The executive lounge is for members only, but I'd be happy to tell you about our membership program if you're interested. Actually, I'd like to speak with your manager about accessing the lounge today." Jessica's smile flickered. This wasn't following the usual script. Most people either had a card, asked about membership, or simply left when told it was members only. They didn't ask to speak to managers about accessing restricted areas. "Let me get Mr. Davidson for you," Jessica said, her tone still polite but cooler now. She picked up a phone behind the hostess stand and spoke quietly. "David, could you come to the lounge entrance? I have a situation that needs your attention." Within moments, a tall man in his 40s approached, wearing a crisp white shirt and a tie that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. David Davidson had the kind of confident stride that came from years of being in charge and rarely being questioned. "Good morning," he said, extending his hand to Simone. "I'm David Davidson, the executive lounge manager. Jessica tells me you'd like to discuss access to our member facilities?" Simone shook his hand firmly. "Yes, I need to conduct some business in the lounge today." David's eyebrows rose slightly. "I appreciate your interest, but the lounge is exclusively for members of our VIP program. There's an application process, and membership fees start at $5,000 annually." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I understand the policy, Simone replied, but I need access today for business purposes. Something in David's expression hardened. He had dealt with pushy customers before, people who thought they could talk their way into exclusive spaces. But there was something about this woman's calm insistence that made him uncomfortable. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to understand that we can't make exceptions to our membership policy. If you'd like to apply for membership, I can have someone walk you through the process, but that would take several weeks for approval. And I need access today. The conversation was drawing attention. Other staff members had begun to notice the prolonged discussion at the lounge entrance. A security guard who had been stationed near the jewelry store started walking in their direction. David glanced around, suddenly aware that they had an audience. His voice dropped lower, taking on the patronizing tone of someone who was used to being obeyed. Look, I don't know what kind of business you think you need to conduct in there, but this is a private facility. We have rules for a reason. I'm going to have to ask you to move along. Move along? Simone repeated, her voice still perfectly calm. Yes. You're creating a disturbance, and you're not authorized to be in this area. That's when the security guard arrived. His name was Tony Martinez, and he had been working security for 6 years. He was good at reading situations, or at least he thought he was. What he saw was a manager having trouble with someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. Everything okay here, Mr. Davidson? Tony asked, positioning himself slightly behind Simone. This woman is insisting on access to the executive lounge without membership, David explained. She won't accept that we have policies. Tony looked at Simone, taking in her appearance, her calm demeanor, the way she hadn't moved or raised her voice despite being told to leave. Something about the situation felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Ma'am, Tony said carefully, if Mr. Davidson has explained the policy and you don't have membership, I'm going to need you to step away from this area. Simone turned to look at both men. And if I don't? The question hung in the air. It wasn't defiant or aggressive, just curious, as if she genuinely wanted to know what would happen next. David felt his frustration rising. This woman was making him look weak in front of his staff, questioning his authority in his own domain. Then we'll have to treat this as a security issue. A security issue, Simone repeated slowly. Yes, you're refusing to comply with clearly stated policies. You're disrupting our business operations, and you're creating a scene. Other shoppers had begun to notice the commotion. A couple browsing nearby slowed their pace to listen. 2 women sitting in the lounge's visible seating area were whispering to each other and looking through the glass doors. Tony shifted uncomfortably. In his experience, real troublemakers were loud, aggressive, or obviously intoxicated. This woman was none of those things. She was calm, well-dressed, and articulate. But Mr. Davidson was clearly agitated, and Tony's job was to support the management team. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me, Tony said, his hand moving to his radio. Where are we going? Simone asked. To the security office so we can sort this out properly. Simone looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, the staff members watching from behind counters, the shoppers pretending not to stare while recording everything on their phones. She saw Jessica filming discreetly, probably thinking she was protecting herself in case there was a complaint later. And if I refuse to go to your security office? David stepped forward, his patience finally exhausted. Then we call the police and have you removed for trespassing. The word hung in the air like a slap. Trespassing. In a public shopping mall. For asking to access a lounge. Simone reached into her portfolio again. For a moment, both men tensed, unsure what she might pull out. But instead of whatever they were expecting, she withdrew a small leather notebook and a pen. Before we proceed, she said, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. You're calling me a security risk for asking to access the executive lounge? You're being uncooperative and disruptive, David said defensively. Simone wrote something in her notebook. And you, she said to Tony, you're prepared to escort me to a security office for asking questions about your policies. Ma'am, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Tony replied. Simone wrote again. Then she looked up at both men, her expression completely serene. Gentlemen, she said quietly, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember exactly what you decided was threatening enough to require security intervention. Something in her tone made both men pause. There was no anger in her voice, no frustration, just a certainty that made them suddenly uncertain. "What's that supposed to mean?" David asked. Simone closed her notebook and tucked it back into her portfolio. "It means you have about 3 minutes to think about whether you really want to treat a woman asking to access a business facility as a security threat." 3 minutes until what? Tony asked. Simone checked her watch, 10:27 a.m. "Until your board meeting starts," she said simply. Both men stared at her. How could she possibly know about the board meeting? "What board meeting?" David asked, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Simone smiled for the first time since the conversation began. It wasn't a warm smile or a threatening one. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The one where you're all going to wish you had made very different choices. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. David Davidson felt sweat beginning to gather at his collar despite the mall's perfect climate control. Something was wrong with this picture, but he couldn't figure out what. "Tony," he said, his voice strained, "call mall administration. Get Rachel Pierce down here immediately." Tony hesitated. Rachel Pierce was the mall's general manager, the kind of person you only called for serious situations. "You sure you want to escalate this, Mr. Davidson? Just make the call." As Tony stepped away to use his radio, David turned back to Simone. The small crowd around them had grown larger. Shoppers were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were openly recording now, and he could hear whispered commentary. "Look, I don't know what game you're playing," David said, lowering his voice, "but you need to understand that you're in serious trouble here. Mall administration doesn't take security threats lightly." Simone tilted her head slightly. "Is that what I am, a security threat?" "You're refusing to follow policy, you're causing a disturbance, and now you're making cryptic threats about board meetings. What would you call it?" Before Simone could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "What exactly is going on here?" Rachel Pierce had arrived, and she looked like someone who had been pulled away from something important. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled, and she carried a tablet that was still lighting up with notifications. Behind her walked 2 more security guards, and a woman David recognized as Lauren Hayes from the mall's legal department. "Miss Pierce," David said, relief evident in his voice, "this woman has been trying to force her way into the executive lounge. She doesn't have membership, she won't accept our policies, and she's been making strange comments about knowing confidential information." Rachel looked at Simone, taking in her appearance, her calm posture, the leather portfolio in her hands. Something nagged at the back of her mind, a detail she couldn't quite place. "Ma'am," Rachel said professionally, "I'm Rachel Pierce, the general manager of Meridian Square. I understand there's been some confusion about our executive lounge policies." "No confusion," Simone replied. "I asked for access to conduct business. Your staff decided I was a security threat for making the request." Lauren Hayes stepped forward, pen poised over a legal pad. "Ma'am, for our records, could you state your name and the nature of your business here today?" Simone looked at the assembled group. 5 mall employees now surrounding her, phones recording from multiple angles, curious shoppers forming a semicircle of witnesses. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a business card. "Simone Washington," she said, handing the card to Rachel. Rachel glanced at the card, and her face went completely pale. She looked at it again, then at Simone, then back at the card. "Oh no," she whispered. "Problem?" David asked, but his confidence was evaporating. Rachel's hands were trembling slightly as she held the card. "David, do you know who this is? Some woman who thinks she can intimidate her way into the lounge? This is Simone Washington. She's the new Regional Vice President of Customer Experience for Hartfield Corporation." The words hit the group like a physical blow. Hartfield Corporation owned Meridian Square. They owned 12 other shopping centers in the region. They were, essentially, everyone's ultimate boss. Tony's radio crackled to life. "Security to administration. We've got multiple customer complaints about an incident on the 3rd floor. Also, corporate is on line 1, asking about a scheduling conflict for the 10:30 meeting." Rachel closed her eyes. "The board meeting. You're supposed to be in the conference room right now." "Actually," Simone said, checking her watch, "I'm supposed to be there in 3 minutes. But I seem to be detained by your security team for the crime of asking to access a business facility. David's world tilted. You're the new VP? That's correct. But you don't. You didn't. Didn't what, David? Didn't look like what you expected? Didn't announce myself with the fanfare you think I deserved? Didn't fit your profile of what a corporate executive should look like? Lauren Hayes was frantically scribbling notes, already thinking about damage control. This was a legal nightmare in the making. Ms. Washington, Rachel said desperately, there's obviously been a terrible misunderstanding. If you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently, Simone interrupted. But you didn't know, so you showed me exactly how you treat customers who don't fit your assumptions about who belongs in exclusive spaces. The crowd around them had swelled. Word was spreading through the mall like wildfire. Corporate executive detained as a security threat. Phones buzzing with shared videos. Employees throughout the building suddenly very nervous about their jobs. David tried to salvage the situation. Ms. Washington, please. I was just following standard operating procedures. We have to maintain security protocols. You called me a security risk for asking questions. You threatened to have me arrested for trespassing in a public mall. You assembled 5 staff members to manage the terrible threat of a woman requesting business access to a lounge. Each word landed like a hammer blow. The phones kept recording. The crowd kept growing. I think, Simone continued, we need to have a very different conversation about your standard operating procedures. Rachel's tablet buzzed urgently. She glanced at it and went even paler. The board is asking where you are. They're waiting. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Simone said. I'm just finishing up some field research. Tony's radio crackled again. All units, we've got the media calling for comment on a viral video. Something about discrimination at Meridian Square. Rachel, you're needed in PR immediately. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. What had started as a simple policy enforcement was becoming a corporate crisis in real time. Ms. Washington, Lauren Hayes said carefully, perhaps we could discuss this matter privately, away from the crowd. Simone looked around at the faces watching her, some concerned, some curious, some recording everything for social media. She saw teenagers with their phones out, posting to platforms that would spread this story across the internet within hours. She saw mall employees whispering urgently into their radios and headsets. Actually, Simone said, I think this is exactly the right audience for this conversation. She turned to address the crowd directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed something important. You've seen how assumptions about who belongs where can escalate into accusations of criminal behavior. You've seen how policies designed to maintain exclusivity can become weapons of discrimination. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. And in about 3 minutes, you're going to see what happens when those assumptions run into accountability. Simone turned back to Rachel Pierce, whose tablet was now buzzing continuously with calls from corporate headquarters. Shall we go to that board meeting now? I believe we have some terminations to discuss. The conference room on the 4th floor of Meridian Square had been carefully prepared for what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review meeting. Fresh pastries sat untouched on a side table. Coffee grew cold in expensive mugs, and 5 regional managers sat around a polished oak table, checking their watches and wondering where their new VP was. Robert Chen, the regional operations director, glanced at his phone for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. It's 10:35. Should we start without her? Give it a few more minutes, said Margaret Fuller, the district sales manager. First impressions matter, especially with a new executive. Maybe she's stuck in traffic, offered James Kellerman from Asset Management. Patricia Valdez, the human resources director, looked uncomfortable. I've been getting strange calls from downstairs. Something about a situation on the 3rd floor? Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Rachel Pierce stumbled in, tablet clutched against her chest, face flushed and breathing heavily. Rachel? Robert stood up. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse, Rachel gasped. I've just committed career suicide. The room fell silent. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see down into the mall's central atrium, where a crowd had gathered near the escalators. Phones were visible everywhere, pointed upward toward the 3rd floor. What are you talking about? Patricia asked. The new VP, Simone Washington. She's here. Well, where is she? Margaret checked her watch impatiently. We're already running late. She's downstairs. We've been detaining her as a security threat for the past 15 minutes. The words hit the room like a physical force. Robert dropped back into his chair. James choked on his coffee. Patricia's pen clattered to the table. What do you mean, detaining her? Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. Davidson called security because she was asking to access the executive lounge without a membership card. Tony Martinez was about to escort her to the security office. I was legal involved. The whole thing is being filmed by customers. Margaret stood up slowly. Are you telling me that our new regional vice president, the woman we're supposed to be impressing today, has been treated like a criminal by our staff? It gets worse. Rachel's voice was shaking. She never identified herself. She just let it happen. She watched us make every wrong assumption, documented our responses, and now she's standing in front of a crowd of witnesses, telling them they've just seen institutional discrimination in action. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in panic. How could you not recognize her? Why didn't she show ID? This is a disaster. Corporate is going to. We're all fired. Quiet. Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. As HR director, she understood the legal implications better than anyone. Rachel, tell me exactly what happened. Every detail. Rachel took a shaky breath and recounted the events. Simone's request for lounge access, David's refusal, the escalation to security, the accusations of being disruptive and threatening. With each detail, the faces around the table grew more horrified. She was testing us, Robert said quietly. This whole thing was a test. No, Patricia corrected, her voice grim. This was an evaluation, and we failed spectacularly. James was frantically typing on his laptop. I'm looking at her corporate bio. She has a PhD in organizational psychology. She specializes in identifying systemic bias in customer service operations. She's consulted for the Department of Justice on discrimination cases. Oh God, Margaret whispered. She knows exactly what she's doing. Patricia's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and went pale. Corporate headquarters. They want to know why our security incident is trending on social media. It's trending? Robert grabbed his phone and started searching. Within seconds, his face confirmed their worst fears. Multiple videos, thousands of views already. Hashtag Meridian Square discrimination is picking up traction. The door opened again, and this time David Davidson entered, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Behind him came Tony Martinez, who wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Gentlemen, Patricia said coldly, I believe you have some explaining to do. David's voice was barely audible. We didn't know who she was. That's not an excuse, Robert snapped. That's the problem. She was asking for special treatment, David said defensively. She wanted lounge access without membership. When I explained the policy, she insisted. When I refused, she became argumentative. Argumentative? Rachel looked at him incredulously. David, I was there. She never raised her voice. She never argued. She asked questions and you called her a security threat. Tony finally spoke up. She was calm, really calm. That's what made me nervous. In my experience, people who stay that cool when they're being confronted are usually planning something. Planning something? Margaret's voice was ice cold. You mean like documenting evidence of discrimination for a corporate investigation? The reality of what they had done was sinking in. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had provided a corporate executive with a real-time demonstration of the exact problems she had been hired to identify and fix. Patricia's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and closed her eyes. It's Simone Washington. The room fell dead silent. Answer it, Robert said grimly. Patricia put the phone on speaker and answered. Ms. Washington, this is Patricia Valdez. Simone's voice came through crystal clear, professional and completely composed. Ms. Valdez, I'm calling to inform you that I'll be arriving at the conference room in approximately 2 minutes. I trust the team is assembled? Yes, ma'am, we're all here. Excellent. I should mention that I've just completed a very enlightening customer experience evaluation of your facility. I have some findings to share that I think will interest everyone. The line went quiet for a moment, then Simone continued. Oh, and Ms. Valdez? You might want to have security escort Mr. Davidson and Mr. Martinez to HR for immediate suspension pending investigation. I'll be conducting individual interviews with each manager to determine who else needs to be relieved of their duties. Patricia looked around the table at her colleagues' horrified faces. Ms. Washington, perhaps we could discuss. Ms. Valdez, Simone's voice cut through the attempt at negotiation, in about 90 seconds, I'm going to walk through that door. When I do, I'll be making some personnel decisions that are going to reshape this entire operation. The line went dead. Robert looked around the table. She's going to fire us, all of us. Not all of us, Patricia said quietly, reading something on her tablet. Just the ones who enabled a culture where a black woman asking for business access gets treated like a criminal. Through the window, they could see Simone stepping onto the escalator, portfolio in hand, expression calm and determined. In 90 seconds, she would walk through their door, and their careers would never be the same. Gentlemen, Margaret said, standing up slowly, I suggest we prepare to meet our new boss. The door opened with deliberate slowness. Simone Washington entered the conference room like she owned it, which, in every way that mattered, she did. Her portfolio was tucked under her arm, her expression was serene, and her presence filled the space with an authority that made every person at the table suddenly feel very small. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded hurricanes. I apologize for the delay. I was conducting some unexpected field research. She moved to the head of the table where an empty chair waited, the chair that had been prepared for their new regional vice president. As she sat down and opened her portfolio, the silence in the room was deafening. Before we begin, Simone said, pulling out a tablet and several manila folders, I want to address the elephant in the room. 15 minutes ago, your staff treated me as a security threat for requesting access to conduct business in your executive lounge. The entire incident was documented by multiple witnesses and is currently circulating on social media. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each manager. I assume you're all wondering whether this will affect your employment status. Robert Chen cleared his throat nervously. Ms. Washington, on behalf of the entire management team, I want to apologize for what happened downstairs. There was clearly a miscommunication. Mr. Chen, Simone interrupted, there was no miscommunication. Your staff performed exactly as they were trained to perform. The problem isn't that they made a mistake. The problem is that their response revealed a systematic pattern of discrimination that's been operating unchecked for months. She opened one of the manila folders and spread several documents across the table. Customer complaint reports from the past 6 months. All filed by Black and Latino customers. All describing similar experiences of being questioned, followed, redirected, or denied access to services that white customers receive without issue. Patricia Valdez leaned forward to examine the documents, her face growing paler with each page. These complaints filed with corporate? They were filed with this location first. When customers didn't receive satisfactory responses, they escalated to corporate. When corporate didn't see a pattern because each complaint was handled as an isolated incident, they escalated to my office. Simone pulled out her tablet and tapped the screen. I have video footage from today's incident, audio recordings of staff conversations about customers who, quote, don't fit the profile, and documentation of differential treatment patterns that constitute a clear violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. Margaret Fuller's voice was barely a whisper. What does that mean for us? It means, Ms. Fuller, that this facility is now under federal investigation for civil rights violations. It means that every employment decision, every customer interaction, and every policy implementation is going to be scrutinized by attorneys who specialize in institutional discrimination cases. James Kellerman was frantically taking notes. Is there anything we can do to mitigate the situation? Simone's smile was sharp as a blade. Mr. Kellerman, 30 minutes ago, you could have mitigated this situation by treating a customer with basic dignity. That window is now closed. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the mall's main floor. Below, the crowd had grown larger. News vans were visible in the parking lot, and reporters were setting up equipment near the main entrance. Here's what's going to happen, Simone said, still looking out the window. Mr. Davidson and Mr. Martinez have already been suspended pending investigation. They will not be returning to work here. David Davidson, who had been sitting silently in the corner, finally found his voice. Ms. Washington, please. I have a family. I was just following protocol. Mr. Davidson, Simone turned to face him. Your protocol involved calling a paying customer a security threat for asking to access a business facility. Your protocol included threatening to have police arrest someone for trespassing in a public mall. Your protocol was discriminatory, and now it's going to cost you your career. She returned to her seat and opened another folder. Miss Pierce, as general manager, you bear responsibility for creating a culture where staff felt comfortable making the assumptions they made today. You're being reassigned to a non-customer-facing role pending retraining. Rachel Pierce nodded numbly, understanding that her career at Meridian Square was effectively over. Ms. Fuller, Simone continued, your sales reports show consistent disparities in conversion rates based on customer demographics. Upon investigation, we've found that your staff has been steering certain customers away from high-end merchandise. You're terminated. Margaret's hands shook as she gathered her belongings. 23 years with the company ended in a sentence. Mr. Kellerman, your asset management reports failed to flag the discriminatory access patterns in the executive lounge despite multiple customer complaints. Either you were incompetent or complicit. Either way, you're done. James stood up slowly, his face ashen. I never meant for anyone to be treated unfairly. Intent is irrelevant, Mr. Kellerman. Impact is what matters. And the impact of your management has been to create a hostile environment for customers of color. Only Robert Chen and Patricia Valdez remained. They sat frozen, waiting for their sentences. Mr. Chen, Simone said, you're being demoted to assistant manager with mandatory bias training and a 6-month probationary period. Ms. Valdez, you're being transferred to corporate headquarters to help develop new training protocols based on what we've learned here today. Robert exhaled shakily. Patricia nodded, understanding that they were the lucky ones. Now, Simone said, sitting back down, let's discuss the immediate steps we're taking to address this crisis. She pulled out a thick document and placed it on the table. This is a comprehensive action plan that will be implemented starting immediately. Every employee will undergo bias training. Every policy will be reviewed for discriminatory impact. Every customer interaction will be monitored for the next 6 months. Patricia picked up the document with trembling hands. This is extensive. This is necessary, Ms. Valdez. Because what happened to me today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that's been growing in this organization for years. Simone's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and stood up. I have a press conference in 20 minutes where I'll be explaining to the media exactly what happened here today and what we're doing to fix it. She gathered her materials and headed toward the door, then paused. One final thing. The executive lounge is being converted into a customer service excellence center, where all staff will receive ongoing training on inclusive service practices. The membership requirement is being eliminated immediately. As she reached the door, Robert called out desperately, Ms. Washington, is there anything else we can do to make this right? Simone turned back, her expression softer but no less resolute. Mr. Chen, you can start by understanding that this was never about making it right with me. This was about making it right with every customer who was made to feel like they didn't belong here. Today, we begin that work. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, leaving the remaining managers to contemplate the wreckage of their careers and the beginning of a very different future for Meridian Square. The press conference setup in Meridian Square's main atrium was unlike anything the mall had ever hosted. News crews from 5 local stations had their cameras trained on a hastily constructed podium, while reporters clutched notepads and checked their recording devices. Social media influencers streamed live to their followers, and curious shoppers formed a growing circle around the perimeter. Behind the scenes, Lauren Hayes from Legal was having the worst day of her career. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Corporate lawyers, insurance companies, civil rights organizations, and journalists, all demanding answers she didn't have. The optics are terrible, she whispered frantically to her assistant. We have a black executive who was detained by her own company's security staff. This is going to be studied in law schools. At 11:45 a.m., Simone Washington stepped up to the podium. She wore the same charcoal coat from earlier, but now it looked less like casual business attire and more like armor. The crowd fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. Good morning. My name is Simone Washington, and I am the Regional Vice President of Customer Experience for Hartfield Corporation, which owns and operates Meridian Square Shopping Center. Camera flashes erupted. The crowd pressed closer. 1 hour ago, I was physically detained by security staff at this facility for the crime of asking to access a business lounge. I was called a security threat, threatened with arrest, and surrounded by 5 employees who assumed I posed a danger to their operation." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. "I want to be very clear about what happened here today. This was not a case of mistaken identity. This was not a misunderstanding about policies. This was a demonstration of how institutional bias operates when people believe no one is watching." In the crowd, Maria Santos held up her phone, streaming the conference to her followers. She had been one of the customers who witnessed the original incident, and her video had already been shared thousands of times. "I saw the whole thing," she whispered to her audience. "This woman never raised her voice, never got aggressive, never did anything that would justify calling security. They profiled her, period." At the podium, Simone continued, "The staff members involved today were not acting maliciously. They were following patterns of behavior that have been normalized in this organization for years. Patterns that treat certain customers as suspicious by default, that question some people's right to access services that others receive without challenge." Behind the press area, Tony Martinez watched from the employee break room, his security badge already confiscated. His wife had texted him 3 times, asking if the viral video really showed him threatening to arrest a corporate executive. He didn't know how to answer. Today's incident has prompted an immediate investigation that has revealed extensive evidence of discriminatory practices at this location, Simone announced. Customer complaints dating back months, staff communications that document bias in service delivery, and policies that disproportionately impact customers of color. Patricia Valdez sat in her office, boxes already packed on her desk. Through her window, she could see the press conference and the growing crowd. Her phone showed missed calls from her husband, her daughter, and her mother, all asking if she was the HR director at, quote, "that mall where the discrimination happened." She had worked for 15 years to build her career, and it was ending with her name associated with a federal civil rights investigation. Effective immediately, Simone continued, several members of management have been terminated for their role in creating and maintaining these discriminatory practices. Others have been reassigned pending retraining. We are implementing a comprehensive reform program developed in consultation with civil rights experts. In his car in the parking lot, David Davidson sat with his head in his hands. His phone showed 17 missed calls from family members who had seen his name trending on social media. 23 years of working his way up from assistant manager to executive lounge supervisor ended because he had made assumptions about who belonged in exclusive spaces. His daughter had texted him a screenshot of a tweet. "Imagine being so racist you detain your own boss." The replies were brutal, and they were spreading. The executive lounge will be permanently restructured as an inclusive space focused on exceptional customer service for all visitors, Simone announced. The membership barriers that enabled today's discrimination are being eliminated. Dr. Angela Foster, director of the local NAACP chapter, stepped forward during the question period. "Ms. Washington, what accountability measures are being put in place to ensure this pattern doesn't repeat at other Hartfield properties?" Excellent question. We are implementing what we're calling the Washington Protocol, a company-wide audit system that will evaluate all Hartfield properties for discriminatory practices. Anonymous customer feedback systems, regular bias testing, and mandatory accountability training for all management staff. A reporter from Channel 7 raised her hand. What message does this send to other companies about the consequences of workplace discrimination? Simone's smile was sharp but satisfied. It sends the message that bias has a cost, that assumptions about who belongs where can destroy careers and reputations, that companies can no longer hide behind claims of isolated incidents when patterns of discrimination are documented and proven. In the corporate headquarters 60 miles away, CEO Jonathan Hartfield watched the press conference from his office. His chief legal counsel sat across from him, frantically taking notes about liability exposure and insurance claims. "She's handling this perfectly," the CEO murmured. "Firm but not vindictive, taking responsibility while making it clear this stops now." "The stock price is actually up," his counsel noted, surprised. "Investors are responding positively to swift action and transparency." Back at the podium, Simone fielded questions for another 20 minutes. She was asked about personal impact, legal action, and future prevention measures. Each answer was measured, professional, and devastating in its clarity. "Will you be pursuing individual legal action against the employees involved?" asked a blogger with a large following. "My goal was never personal retaliation. My goal was systemic change. Today's actions serve that purpose." Do you believe the employees involved are inherently racist? I believe they were operating within a system that normalized discriminatory assumptions. The problem isn't individual hearts and minds, it's institutional practices that make bias comfortable and consequence-free. As the press conference ended, Simone stepped away from the podium to a round of applause from the crowd. But the real measure of success wouldn't be in the media coverage or the social media shares. It would be in whether the changes implemented today would prevent another customer from being made to feel like they didn't belong. As she walked back into the mall, past the shops where staff members now looked at her with recognition and respect rather than suspicion, Simone knew that the real work was just beginning. The reckoning had been public and swift. The transformation would be private and slow. But it would be permanent. 6 months later, Meridian Square looked almost exactly the same, but everything had changed. Simone Washington walked through the main entrance on a crisp Tuesday morning, her usual coffee in hand, observing the subtle transformations that most visitors would never notice. The same marble floors gleamed under the same LED lighting, but the energy was completely different. Near the information kiosk, she watched a young black teenager ask about store locations. The staff member, new since the restructuring, responded with genuine enthusiasm, offering to walk him to the store and chatting about the sneaker release he was looking for. 6 months ago, that same teenager would have been watched, followed, and questioned. The executive lounge had been transformed into the Customer Excellence Center, its frosted glass doors now bearing a simple sign, "All Welcome." Through the transparent walls, Simone could see diverse groups of customers enjoying the comfortable seating, complimentary refreshments, and personal shopping assistance that had once been reserved for paying members. At the center's entrance, Jessica Rodriguez, formerly the hostess who had demanded membership cards, now greeted every visitor with the same warm professionalism. She had been one of 15 employees who chose to undergo the intensive bias training rather than seek employment elsewhere. Today, she was training 2 new hires on inclusive customer service protocols. "Ms. Washington," Jessica called out, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "How are you this morning?" "I'm well, Jessica. How's the new training program going?" "It's incredible. We had a customer yesterday who said this was the first time she'd ever felt truly welcome in an upscale shopping environment. She spent 3 hours here and bought something from 4 different stores." Simone smiled. These were the stories that mattered. Not the viral videos or the headlines, but the individual experiences of customers who now felt seen and valued. In the former security office, Robert Chen reviewed the monthly customer satisfaction reports with his new team. The numbers told a remarkable story. Customer satisfaction up 34%, sales revenue increased 28%, and customer complaints down 89%. More importantly, the demographic breakdown of both satisfaction scores and spending showed no significant disparities for the first time in the mall's recorded history. "The Washington Protocol is working," Robert told his team during their weekly meeting. "But remember, this isn't about hitting numbers. It's about creating an environment where every customer feels like they belong here." The Washington Protocol had indeed spread throughout Hartfield Corporation's portfolio. 12 shopping centers across the region now implemented the same comprehensive bias detection and prevention systems. Other retail companies had reached out requesting consultation on similar programs, and Simone found herself traveling frequently to speak at industry conferences. But the real measure of success was in the small moments that never made headlines. Like when Maria Santos, the customer who had filmed the original incident, brought her elderly mother shopping and watched staff members patiently help her navigate the stores in Spanish and English. Like when Tony Martinez, who had completed a year-long bias training program and community service requirement, was hired as a diversity and inclusion coordinator at a different Hartfield property, using his experience to train other security personnel. Like when David Davidson, after losing his job and spending months in reflection, started volunteering with a local organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals develop job skills, finally understanding how quickly assumptions could destroy someone's opportunities. The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 employees had quit rather than participate in bias training. 2 managers had filed unsuccessful lawsuits claiming discrimination against them. Several longtime customers had complained about the new atmosphere and taken their business elsewhere. But for every person who resisted change, dozens more embraced it. Sales staff reported that customers seemed more relaxed, stayed longer, and returned more frequently. The mall's employee retention rate had improved dramatically as workers felt proud of their workplace culture. In her office overlooking the main atrium, Simone reviewed the quarterly report she would present to the board the following week. The financial numbers were impressive, but what moved her most were the customer testimonials included in the appendix. One letter particularly stood out, from a mother who wrote, "My daughter is 12 and brown-skinned, and she's always been nervous in fancy stores, waiting to be told she doesn't belong. Yesterday she spent an hour trying on clothes at 3 different boutiques, and every staff member treated her like she was the most important customer in the world. She came home confident and happy. Thank you for creating a space where she can just be a kid who likes shopping." Another testimonial came from an elderly gentleman. "I've been shopping here for 8 years, and I never realized how uncomfortable other customers were being made to feel. The changes you've implemented have made this a more welcoming place for everyone, including people like me who didn't know we were part of the problem." Simone's assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Washington, you have a call from the Department of Justice. They want to discuss using Meridian Square as a case study for their new retail discrimination prevention guidelines." As Simone took the call, she reflected on how far they had come from that morning 6 months ago, when she had been called a security threat for asking to access a business lounge. The DOJ representative explained that Meridian Square's transformation had become a model for addressing institutional bias in retail environments. They wanted to document the protocols and training programs to share with other companies facing similar challenges. "The most impressive aspect," the DOJ representative noted, "isn't just that you eliminated discriminatory practices, but that you improved the overall customer experience for everyone. That's the key to sustainable change, making inclusion profitable and practical, not just morally correct." After the call, Simone walked down to the main floor one more time before leaving for the day. The afternoon crowd was diverse and relaxed, families and individuals from every background moving comfortably through the space. Near the fountain where she had first paused 6 months ago, a group of teenagers sat sharing snacks and showing each other purchases from various stores. Among them was the same young man she had seen browsing handbags that first day, the one who had been redirected away from luxury items. Today he carried a bag from one of the high-end boutiques and was excitedly showing his friends a watch he had saved up to buy. No one had questioned his presence, followed him through the store, or assumed he couldn't afford the merchandise. He was simply a customer, treated with the respect that should have been his all along. As Simone reached the exit, her phone buzzed with a text from her brother, saw the Washington Protocol mentioned in the Wall Street Journal today. Dad would have been proud. She paused at the automatic doors, looking back at the transformed space. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't something you had to fight for. It was something you demanded by refusing to accept anything less. He had also taught her that real change happened not in the dramatic moments that made headlines, but in the quiet, daily choices that created new norms. 6 months ago, she had been called a security threat for the crime of being a black woman who expected equal treatment. Today, that expectation was built into every policy, every training program, and every customer interaction at Meridian Square. The automatic doors slid open, and Simone stepped into the afternoon sunshine. Behind her, the mall hummed with the sound of commerce, conversation, and most importantly, genuine welcome for everyone who entered. The security guard who nodded respectfully as she passed had been trained in de-escalation and bias recognition. The manager reviewing evening schedules had completed 40 hours of inclusive leadership training. The sales associate helping a customer find the perfect outfit saw only a person who deserved excellent service, regardless of race, age, or apparent economic status. This was how change really happened, not in the dramatic moment when assumptions collapsed, but in the thousands of small moments afterward when new assumptions, better assumptions, took their place. Simone Washington had come to Meridian Square as a test. She was leaving it as a transformation. And across the country, in boardrooms and break rooms, retail spaces and corporate headquarters, people were learning that the cost of bias was higher than they had ever imagined, and the benefits of inclusion were greater than they had ever dared to hope. The woman who had been called a security threat had become the architect of a security that actually protected what mattered most: the dignity of every person who walked through those doors. That, she thought as she drove away, was a legacy worth building. 6 months later, Meridian Square looked almost exactly the same, but everything had changed. Simone Washington walked through the main entrance on a crisp Tuesday morning, her usual coffee in hand, observing the subtle transformations that most visitors would never notice. The same marble floors gleamed under the same LED lighting, but the energy was completely different. Near the information kiosk, she watched a young black teenager ask about store locations. The staff member, new since the restructuring, responded with genuine enthusiasm, offering to walk him to the store and chatting about the sneaker release he was looking for. 6 months ago, that same teenager would have been watched, followed, and questioned. The executive lounge had been transformed into the Customer Excellence Center, its frosted glass doors now bearing a simple sign, "All welcome." Through the transparent walls, Simone could see diverse groups of customers enjoying the comfortable seating, complimentary refreshments, and personal shopping assistance that had once been reserved for paying members. At the center's entrance, Jessica Rodriguez, formerly the hostess who had demanded membership cards, now greeted every visitor with the same warm professionalism. She had been one of 15 employees who chose to undergo the intensive bias training rather than seek employment elsewhere. Today she was training 2 new hires on inclusive customer service protocols. "Ms. Washington," Jessica called out, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. "How are you this morning?" "I'm well, Jessica. How's the new training program going?" "It's incredible. We had a customer yesterday who said this was the first time she'd ever felt truly welcome in an upscale shopping environment. She spent 3 hours here and bought something from 4 different stores." Simone smiled. These were the stories that mattered, not the viral videos or the headlines, but the individual experiences of customers who now felt seen and valued. In the former security office, Robert Chen reviewed the monthly customer satisfaction reports with his new team. The numbers told a remarkable story. Customer satisfaction up 34%, sales revenue increased 28%, and customer complaints down 89%. More importantly, the demographic breakdown of both satisfaction scores and spending showed no significant disparities for the first time in the mall's recorded history. "The Washington Protocol is working," Robert told his team during their weekly meeting. "But remember, this isn't about hitting numbers. It's about creating an environment where every customer feels like they belong here." The Washington Protocol had indeed spread throughout Hartfield Corporation's portfolio. 12 shopping centers across the region now implemented the same comprehensive bias detection and prevention systems. Other retail companies had reached out requesting consultation on similar programs, and Simone found herself traveling frequently to speak at industry conferences. But the real measure of success was in the small moments that never made headlines. Like when Maria Santos, the customer who had filmed the original incident, brought her elderly mother shopping and watched staff members patiently help her navigate the stores in Spanish and English. Like when Tony Martinez, who had completed a year-long bias training program and community service requirement, was hired as a diversity and inclusion coordinator at a different Hartfield property, using his experience to train other security personnel. Like when David Davidson, after losing his job and spending months in reflection, started volunteering with a local organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals develop job skills, finally understanding how quickly assumptions could destroy someone's opportunities. The transformation hadn't been easy. 3 employees had quit rather than participate in bias training. 2 managers had filed unsuccessful lawsuits claiming discrimination against them. Several longtime customers had complained about the new atmosphere and taken their business elsewhere. But for every person who resisted change, dozens more embraced it. Sales staff reported that customers seemed more relaxed, stayed longer, and returned more frequently. The mall's employee retention rate had improved dramatically as workers felt proud of their workplace culture. In her office overlooking the main atrium, Simone reviewed the quarterly report she would present to the board the following week. The financial numbers were impressive, but what moved her most were the customer testimonials included in the appendix. One letter particularly stood out, from a mother who wrote, "My daughter is 12 and brown-skinned, and she's always been nervous in fancy stores, waiting to be told she doesn't belong. Yesterday, she spent an hour trying on clothes at 3 different boutiques, And every staff member treated her like she was the most important customer in the world. She came home confident and happy. Thank you for creating a space where she can just be a kid who likes shopping. Another testimonial came from an elderly gentleman. I've been shopping here for 8 years, and I never realized how uncomfortable other customers were being made to feel. The changes you've implemented have made this a more welcoming place for everyone, including people like me who didn't know we were part of the problem. Simone's assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Washington, you have a call from the Department of Justice. They want to discuss using Meridian Square as a case study for their new retail discrimination prevention guidelines. As Simone took the call, she reflected on how far they had come from that morning 6 months ago when she had been called a security threat for asking to access a business lounge. The DOJ representative explained that Meridian Square's transformation had become a model for addressing institutional bias in retail environments. They wanted to document the protocols and training programs to share with other companies facing similar challenges. The most impressive aspect, the DOJ representative noted, isn't just that you eliminated discriminatory practices, but that you improved the overall customer experience for everyone. That's the key to sustainable change, making inclusion profitable and practical, not just morally correct. After the call, Simone walked down to the main floor one more time before leaving for the day. The afternoon crowd was diverse and relaxed, families and individuals from every background moving comfortably through the space. Near the fountain where she had first paused 6 months ago, a group of teenagers sat sharing snacks and showing each other purchases from various stores. Among them was the same young man she had seen browsing handbags that first day, the one who had been redirected away from luxury items. Today he carried a bag from one of the high-end boutiques and was excitedly showing his friends a watch he had saved up to buy. No one had questioned his presence, followed him through the store, or assumed he couldn't afford the merchandise. He was simply a customer, treated with the respect that should have been his all along. As Simone reached the exit, her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. Saw the Washington Protocol mentioned in the Wall Street Journal today. Dad would have been proud. She paused at the automatic doors, looking back at the transformed space. Her father had taught her that dignity wasn't something you had to fight for. It was something you demanded by refusing to accept anything less. He had also taught her that real change happened not in the dramatic moments that made headlines, but in the quiet, daily choices that created new norms. 6 months ago, she had been called a security threat for the crime of being a black woman who expected equal treatment. Today, that expectation was built into every policy, every training program, and every customer interaction at Meridian Square. The automatic doors slid open, and Simone stepped into the afternoon sunshine. Behind her, the mall hummed with the sound of commerce, conversation, and most importantly, genuine welcome for everyone who entered. The security guard who nodded respectfully as she passed had been trained in de-escalation and bias recognition. The manager reviewing evening schedules had completed 40 hours of inclusive leadership training. The sales associate helping a customer find the perfect outfit saw only a person who deserved excellent service, regardless of race, age, or apparent economic status. This was how change really happened. Not in the dramatic moment when assumptions collapsed, but in the thousands of small moments afterward when new assumptions, better assumptions, took their place. Simone Washington had come to Meridian Square as a test. She was leaving it as a transformation. And across the country, in boardrooms and break rooms, retail spaces, and corporate headquarters, people were learning that the cost of bias was higher than they had ever imagined, and the benefits of inclusion were greater than they had ever dared to hope. The woman who had been called a security threat had become the architect of a security that actually protected what mattered most, the dignity of every person who walked through those doors. That, she thought as she drove away, was a legacy worth building. 3 weeks later, Simone found herself standing before the National Retail Federation's annual conference, addressing an audience of over 2,000 industry executives. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as she prepared to deliver the keynote speech that had been titled, "The Business Case for Inclusive Excellence." 18 months ago, she began, I walked into a shopping mall as a customer and was treated as a criminal. Today, that same mall has become the most profitable location in our portfolio, with customer satisfaction scores that exceed industry standards by 40%. The audience leaned forward, notebooks and tablets ready. The transformation didn't happen because we decided to be nice. It happened because we decided to be smart. Because we learned that bias isn't just morally wrong, it's economically stupid. In the audience, retail executives from across the country took notes as Simone shared specific metrics, how eliminating discriminatory practices had increased average transaction values, how inclusive training had reduced employee turnover by 67%, how diverse customer bases had driven innovation in product selection and marketing strategies. But the real impact was becoming evident in ways that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. Dr. Aisha Patel, a researcher at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, had spent 6 months studying the Meridian Square transformation for her doctoral dissertation on institutional bias in commercial settings. Her preliminary findings showed that the changes had created what she termed a dignity dividend, measurable improvements in community health, local economic development, and social cohesion that extended far beyond the mall itself. When people feel welcomed and valued in commercial spaces, Dr. Patel explained to her research team, it changes their relationship with the entire community. We're seeing increased civic participation, improved mental health outcomes, and stronger neighborhood economics in the areas surrounding these transformed retail locations. The ripple effects were indeed spreading beyond retail. Local schools had reached out to implement similar bias recognition training for teachers and administrators. Healthcare systems were adapting the Washington Protocol for patient care environments. Even city government offices were requesting consultation on making public services more inclusive. Back at Meridian Square, the monthly community advisory meetings had become a cornerstone of the mall's operation. Representatives from local organizations, regular customers, and community leaders met with management to provide ongoing feedback and suggestions for improvement. Carmen Delgado, a social worker who had become a regular advisor, spoke during one meeting about the broader impact. My clients used to avoid this mall because they felt unwelcome. Now they shop here, eat here, and bring their families here. It's not just about retail. It's about belonging to the community. The advisory meetings had also led to innovative programming. The mall now hosted financial literacy workshops, small business incubator events, and cultural celebrations that reflected the diversity of the surrounding neighborhoods. The former executive lounge space occasionally transformed into a community meeting room for local organizations. One particularly moving success story involved Angela Freeman, a recent college graduate who had applied for a management trainee position at Meridian Square specifically because of its reputation for inclusive leadership. During her interview, she mentioned that she had been present as a customer during Simone's original incident. I watched how Ms. Washington handled that situation with such grace and strength, Angela told the hiring panel. I knew I wanted to work for a company that would support that kind of leadership. This is where I want to build my career. Angela had since been promoted twice and was leading the development of inclusive retail practices at 2 other Hartfield properties. The transformation had also attracted unexpected partnerships. A local university's business school had established an internship program at Meridian Square, sending students to study inclusive customer service practices. A documentary crew was completing a film about the Washington Protocol's development and implementation. International retail consultants were visiting to understand how the model might translate to different cultural contexts. But perhaps the most significant indicator of lasting change came from an unexpected source: former employees who had initially resisted the transformation. Lindsay Harper, the assistant manager who had been terminated on that first day, had spent months unemployed and angry, convinced that she had been scapegoated for company-wide problems. But as she struggled to find new employment and faced difficult questions about her departure from Meridian Square, she began to reflect more deeply on her role in creating the discriminatory culture. She eventually enrolled in a community college course on diversity and inclusion, started volunteering with a local immigrant services organization, and slowly began to understand how her assumptions had impacted real people's lives. When a position opened at a different retail location that had implemented the Washington Protocol, Lindsay applied and was transparent about her history. During her interview, she spoke candidly about what she had learned and how she had changed. I spent months being angry at Ms. Washington for ruining my career, Lindsay admitted. But the truth is, she saved me from continuing to harm people without even realizing it. I want to be part of the solution now. She was hired as a sales associate and had since become one of the most effective advocates for inclusive practices among her new colleagues. The academic and business communities had begun studying the Meridian Square case as a rare example of successful, rapid institutional change. Harvard Business School had developed a case study that was being taught in leadership and organizational behavior courses. The transformation had been featured in scholarly articles examining the intersection of social justice and business strategy. Dr. Michael Chen, a professor of organizational psychology at Northwestern University, noted in his research, "The Washington Protocol succeeded where many diversity initiatives fail because it addressed systems and structures, not just attitudes. Rather than trying to change hearts and minds first, they changed policies and practices, and the cultural shifts followed." But for Simone, the most meaningful measure of success remained the individual stories that rarely made it into academic papers or business journals. Like the story of Marcus Rodriguez, a teenager with autism who had previously found shopping overwhelming due to sensory sensitivities and social anxiety. The mall's new emphasis on patient, individualized customer service had led staff to naturally accommodate his needs, making Meridian Square one of the few places where he felt comfortable shopping independently. Or the story of Eleanor Washington, no relation, an elderly African-American woman who had lived in the area for 60 years but had rarely shopped at the mall because she never felt welcome. Now at age 78, she was a regular customer who had developed friendships with several staff members and considered the mall part of her weekly social routine. These stories reminded Simone why the work mattered beyond profit margins and industry recognition. Each person who felt welcomed, valued, and respected represented a small victory against the forces of exclusion and assumption that still operated in too many spaces. As she prepared for her next challenge, implementing the Washington Protocol across Hartfield Corporation's entire portfolio of 47 properties, Simone knew that the most important lesson from Meridian Square wasn't about retail practices or corporate policies. It was about the power of refusing to accept the way things are as an excuse for the way things have to be. Every customer who walked through those doors now experienced something that should have been normal all along: the simple dignity of being treated as a valued human being, regardless of their appearance, background, or assumptions others might make about their purchasing power. That transformation, multiplied across thousands of daily interactions, was quietly revolutionizing not just how business was conducted, but what business could aspire to be. And it had all started with a woman who refused to accept being called a security threat for the crime of expecting equal treatment. The legacy was still being written, one welcome, one interaction, one moment of recognition at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.